welcome back to While You Were Cleaning. Today I have some Dollar Tree pumpkin DIYs to share with you. I wanted to do a themed video with all pumpkin DIYs, so I hope that this is something that you enjoy. Let me know down in the comments if you'd love to see some more themed videos like this one. But I hope you enjoy today's video. If you do, please hit that like button. Please comment and subscribe, and we'll go ahead and get started. This first DIY is very simple. You'll just need a pumpkin with some smooth edges and then some rub-on transfer letters. You can get these in different colors from Dollar Tree. And then I just cut out the word fall from the transfer letters, and I'm just using my fingers to press on the letters and then just making sure that I get the edges a little bit with a little dowel piece. You can also use a popsicle stick. Just make sure those edges are down or they might tear on the letters. And it's as simple as that. If you don't like the color of your pumpkin, you can always spray paint it another color. And like I said, they do have these letters in a few different colors at Dollar Tree. They're all mainly about this same size though, so it works best on a small pumpkin. Next, I wanted to try and give some pumpkins a wood look, and these pumpkins from Dollar Tree already kind of have a carved wood look to them. So first off, I'm going to spray paint these in this Rust-Oleum Satin Dark Walnut color. This is the only brown color that I had on hand already. So if you're going out and buying spray paint, I would maybe go with a little bit more of a medium brown color. I did have to give these pumpkins 2 coats of spray paint. To finish up the wood look, you'll need a small amount of water and then some white and brown paint. I picked up these tempera paints from Dollar Tree and they worked really well for this project. First off, you'll want to give your pumpkins 2 coats of the white paint, and I did really short, small brush strokes. I didn't worry about spreading it out super thin. It's thicker in some areas, thinner in the other areas. I was just trying to really highlight all of the ridges that made this pumpkin look like it was carved from wood. This project is pretty simple to complete. It just has a lot of drying time, so I did stick these in front of a fan to speed up that process a little bit. You'll add 2 coats of white using this method. Now the next step is going to look like it's out of order because I did try it in a different order first, but I do like it with the white coat first of all. So then in your cup of water, you're going to add some of the brown and some of the white to make a watery light brown color. And then what we're going to do is we're going to paint over the white coat with this watery brown. And you'll be able to see all the variants of color underneath this watery brown color. So you'll do both of your pumpkins with this. And then what I did was I went through and I added a little bit more of the white and the brown paint to my watery mix, and I thickened it up a little bit because I didn't want to be able to see through the finished color as much as I did with my first coat. So this is the second coat of brown here. I added on that. Make sure you do lift up your pumpkins and paint the underneath side of them first because it'll be hard to get to once you start painting the top of your pumpkins. But this is the last coat of brown, and the reason I really like this paint is because it dries in a nice matte color. So here you can see what the finished look looks like, and I think that it looks kind of like a carved wood pumpkin. Let me know what you think down in the comments. Next, I'm going to use this Burlap Pumpkin from Dollar Tree, and I removed the stem on it. You can use any small or large foam pumpkin that you can find at the store or that you already have on hand. And I'm just going to lighten up the color on this with this white spray paint. You could use any white spray paint for this as well. And if you use a darker pumpkin, you might have to give it 2 coats. I just used 1 coat to lighten up the finish. Then you'll need some nautical rope. You could use either color that you like. Both of them would work. I'm going to be using the lighter one. I wrapped the rope around the pumpkin one time and then added on about an extra 1.5 inches to know how long I needed this rope to be in order to go around my pumpkin. Then I undid the weave on the rope and then I braided the rope all the way down to the end of the rope. I did end up using almost this entire package of nautical rope, so you could unweave the entire thing and braid it all at once if you wanted to, but I cut all of my pieces into this same length and braided them in smaller amounts instead. You could do either way. And then I went ahead and hot glued this rope all the way around my pumpkin, right along one of the seams. Just make sure that you get the end of the rope glued down really well so that it doesn't come undone. I finished cutting and braiding all of my rope strands off camera, so then I went ahead and with my second rope strand, I glued it also all the way around this entire pumpkin on the other side of that seam where I had glued the other strand of rope. Next, I took another piece of braided rope and I glued it along the side seams. So this one went along the side, and then when I got to the bottom, I cut it off there because if I went all the way around the pumpkin, it would have made the pumpkin unbalanced on the bottom. So I used this, glued it along both of these side seams, and then repeated that on the other side of the pumpkin as well. Now that all of the seams are covered, I'm going to use an entire strand of rope and I'm going to glue it along these middle portions. So this one I just curved at the bottom and then brought back up to the center at the top. You can see here what that looks like, and I repeated that on all of the other portions as well. And here you can see what it looks like. There's just these smaller gaps left, and I'm going to fill those in next. For these last gaps on the pumpkin, I peeled back my braided rope and then pushed the edges of my new piece underneath with my scissors so I wouldn't get hot glue on my hands. And then if you push up on this braid, it'll make it a little bit wider and you'll be able to fill in all of that gapped area. So you can see here it covered up the gap just fine, and I filled in the other 3 as well. And here you can see how my entire braided pumpkin looks. Next, I'm going to embellish my pumpkin with some narrow ribbon and some of this garland that I found at Dollar Tree. I am using ribbon that I already had on hand. I don't know if they have something similar to this at Dollar Tree, but they do have a lot of thinner ribbons to choose from. So I just tied a simple bow out of this ribbon, and then I used hot glue to glue the ribbon to the top of my pumpkin. Next, I'll be using some of this thin garland, so I wrapped it around my finger to make a tight spiral, and then I cut off the garland with my wire cutters and then wrapped the other side of the garland around my finger to make a spiral as well. And then I'll just hot glue this right behind that ribbon, and you can see how it has little vines coming out. Lastly, I added a small wood stem from Dollar Tree to the top of the pumpkin to use as a stem, and I really love the way that this pumpkin turned out. For my next set of pumpkins, I picked up some simple pumpkins from Dollar Tree, and I'm going to be spray painting this first one in this Rust-Oleum Ultra Matte white color. Try to get something that's matte or flat for the finish on this one. And I did add 2 coats of spray paint to this pumpkin, and then for this pumpkin here, I'll be using this Rust-Oleum flat black spray paint on it, and I added 2 coats of spray paint to that one as well. Make sure you do get the bottom of the pumpkin. Next, I followed the instructions on this plaster of Paris to mix just a small amount of it. I just needed enough to cover the bottom of this bowl. So you just want to make sure that you mix it and get all of the clumps out of the plaster of Paris, and here's what that will look like with all of the clumps gone. And then I'm going to take my pumpkins and dip them into this plaster of Paris to give them that dipped pumpkin look. If you want the plaster of Paris to come up a little bit higher on the side of the pumpkin, all you need to do is tip your bowl and just keep running the pumpkin around, spin it in circles. this pumpkin had this tag on the bottom that was kind of in the way, but you can see how it looks with that ridge added to the bottom of the pumpkin. And this black one, I think, is one of my favorite DIYs from today's video. I really love the way that it looks. Tipped the bowl so that I could come up a little bit higher on the edge of the black pumpkin. If I were to redo these, I would probably add a little bit of paint to the plaster of Paris for the white pumpkin so that you could see that dipped bottom part show up a little bit better, but I still really love the way that these two turned out. Next, I'll be using this Rust-Oleum metallic gold spray paint to paint one of these pumpkin wreath forms from Dollar Tree. This is the first year I've been able to find one of these, and I've been really wanting to do a DIY with them. So I did spray paint the underneath side of the pumpkin wreath form first, because you will be able to see the color on some of those ridges if you miss the back of it. Just make sure you get all of the edges really well. Here you can see what it looks like, and then I'm going to be adding some greenery to this pumpkin. You can pick up some greenery from Dollar Tree. I do have some here from Walmart as well. Then I'll be using some of these pumpkins, this wire garland, and then some of these cotton stems and some buffalo check ribbon. This greenery here and the eucalyptus stems are from Walmart, and they were 97 cents for the stems. I did use one of each for this project, and then I used some of these willow stems as well, and those are from Dollar Tree. And I used a piece of wire to hold these together, and I'm going to add a group of this greenery coming out from one side of the bottom of the pumpkin, and then I did an identical grouping to come out from the other bottom edge of the pumpkin as well, and wired that in place onto the frame. I was trying to use up some greenery that I already had for this project. You can use what you have, or you can find similar greenery to these at Dollar Tree. You could also use some flowers. Next, I used this buffalo check ribbon to make a bow for the bottom of my wreath, and I did 4 loops of this ribbon for the bow and then cut it off, and then I used a piece of wire to hold the center of the bow together. And just make sure your wire is long enough so that you can also use it to wire the bow onto the bottom of your wreath. And then you can fluff all of the loops on your bow. Try to kind of angle this bow up a little bit too, because you don't want it hanging off the bottom of the wreath, but rather being up on the form a little bit. And then I looped some of this garland around my fingers so that it could be spiraled on each side, very similar to what I did for the braided pumpkin that I put together. I just did a nice long strand. The loops are a little bit bigger than what I did for that pumpkin, and then I stretched those out to go across the entire bottom edge of this wreath form, and then I wired those in the center on the back of the pumpkin. Next, I added a couple of these cream colored pumpkins. They do have the clips on the back, so I added them onto that wired garland on each side, and then I added some of these cotton stems. Now, these are cotton stems that I already had from a Michael's grab bag. If you don't have any cotton stems on hand, or you can't find any at Dollar Tree, I also have a video on how to make these, and I will link that up at the top corner here so that you can go see how to make those for yourself in an affordable way. I wired together some greenery to add to the top of this wreath form as well, and then I made a second one of those buffalo check bows. This one's just a little bit smaller than the first one, but it also has 4 loops. Wired that onto the top, and then added the remaining pumpkin to the top of this wreath form as well. I really love the way that this one turned out. I saw a picture of one from Kirkland's that I'm sure was $60+, and this barely cost me anything to make, maybe right around $5 or $6. Next, I'll be using one of these DIY wood pumpkins. The Dollar Tree has a few different forms like this in the store. And then I removed the raffia bow and the string from the top of the pumpkin. And I'll be staining this with this autumn wood stain color. This is a fast drying one. You could use stain or paint for this part. You could water down some paint so that you can still see the wood grain through it if you wanted to. And I just used a paper towel to add this on, which left some little pieces on the pumpkin, but I was able to brush those off later. So you can use a paper towel or you can use a brush, whatever you might have. And here is that pumpkin form stained, and then I'll be using some of this brown nautical rope, and I'm going to hot glue this first around that center raised wood part on the pumpkin, and then I cut it off at the top and glued down the end. And then next I'll be adding the rope around the outside edges of the pumpkin. So I did each edge individually, so glued it at the top, cut it off at the bottom and glued it down, and then did the last side in the same way, just cutting it off at the bottom. Next, I used some ribbon to tie a small bow. This is the same ribbon that I used earlier on. It's just one that I already had on hand, and I just tied a smaller bow to add to the top. And I'll be using some of this raffia to also tie a bow. You can reuse the raffia bow that was already at the top of this pumpkin, but I misplaced mine somewhere. So I just made a new one and I wired the center of it together. And this bow is about the same size as the ribbon bow that I tied. I used hot glue to add this raffia bow down first, right at the top of the pumpkin, and then on top of that I added some more hot glue and glued down my ribbon. Then I added some little eucalyptus leaves to the side of where the bows come out on each side, and then in the center of the pumpkin I added one of these galvanized words. I used the Thankful one. These come in a 3-pack and you could use any of the words that they have. And then for my last step, I'm going to use 4 of these tumbling tower game blocks, and I'm going to glue them together to make a stand to hold my pumpkin upright. And I just tipped the pumpkin back a little bit so that it's leaning back so it doesn't fall forward. And here's how that pumpkin looks all finished. This DIY really surprised me. I didn't think that it was going to be one of my favorites, but it definitely ended up being one of my favorite DIYs from today's video. Our last project today is another simple pumpkin DIY. You'll need one of these large foam pumpkins and you'll want to paint it white. You can hand paint it or spray paint it. It has to be a lighter color because we are going to be covering this with one of these white microfiber cloths that you can find in the automotive section at your Dollar Tree. I cut about 3 or 4 inches of the cloth off of the end so I didn't have too much to work with. And then on the top of my pumpkin, I used my scissors to make the hole larger. And it does have this natural ridge at the top, so you can cut out to that ridge. I brought my 2 shortest edges of the cloth up first to the center, and I needed to glue those down. And then I just folded over the cloth and worked my way around the pumpkin, pushing the cloth down into the hole in the center of the pumpkin. And then lastly, I'm just going to add one of these wood stems that came in a pack from Dollar Tree. This is another very simple DIY, and I love the way that it turned out. It's one of my favorites from today's video, and it cost me only $2 in supplies. Let me know down in the comments which of these pumpkins were your favorites. I really love the black dipped one and the fur one. Thank you all so much for watching today's video and for supporting my channel. I hope you all have a great day, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye!